thrilled to introduce our next speaker, Andrew LaMonica. Andrew has held design leadership positions at Northwestern Mutual, GE, the Olympics, with his work being honored for excellence by top industry organizations like CNBC, Wall Street Journal, Business Insider, and a whole lot more. So, pulling from those experiences, he's going to talk with us about executive leadership, how to craft a shared vision, design principles, and how to build trust along the way. So, very excited to hear more from Andrew himself.
Thank you so much for having me. There's a critical demand for companies to have a best-in-class customer experience that solves real problems for real people. The challenge is there's a vast shortage of executives who can craft a shared vision, unify the complete end-to-end experience, and have the trust of the people to execute this effectively and at scale. Now, as more and more companies compete for the customer, leaders are needed who can deliver against the end-to-end experience, galvanize the teams, and deliver value in a way that a company can own. This keynote will share practical takeaways, useful strategies, and some tactical frameworks around how to navigate these challenges. Okay. All right. So I'm going to talk about 3 big tentpoles over the next 20 minutes. The first thing I'm going to talk about is, as an executive, how to craft a shared vision and make it customer focused. I'm also going to share some common leadership traps and derailing behavior. The intention being that if you know where the pitfalls are, you can avoid them. The next thing I'm going to talk about is experience design principles. This is a super common tool that best-in-class brands use, like your Apples, your Amazons, your Googles. It's a strategic way to bust silos, democratize the experience, and focus on business outcomes, not pretty output. The last part will be about trust. Now, this is a key thing for any executive because if you don't have it, you can't do everything else. All right, so let's jump right in. So there are 2 aspects of how a person becomes convinced of the vision. The first part is how the information is delivered, and the second part is how they process the information. These are called modes of persuasion. Now, there's a handful of frameworks that I think are super, super good. I'm going to share one that I actually use most often. This is called the appeals of argument. Now, this is where you make 3 very specific justifications to convince your audience of your vision. There's a logical part, there's an emotional part, and there's a credibility part. Now, the interesting thing about this is this actually dates back to Aristotle. And it was one of the first ones that I learned at Harvard Business School. It's like the FedEx logo. It's been around forever, and it just works. So the first part is your logical evidence. What are the commonly shared beliefs? What are the universal truths, the data, the charts, the numbers, the analytics, all of those things that appeal to the logical part of the brain. The second part is this emotional appeal. That's passion and needs, hopes and fears, scare me or surprise me. And the last part is establishing credibility. This is where you bring up your subject matter expertise, similarities to the audience, like strong character, or anything that gives your information credence. Now, I know this is like ludicrously simple, but you listen to any lawyer give a closing argument, you listen to a politician give a stump speech, or you listen to a late night infomercial, you're going to hear these 3 things convincing someone of a vision. Now, there's a lot of financial service institutions who are focusing on customer centricity. Now, customer obsession is kind of new to that landscape, but whenever I'm working with stakeholders, there's always some things that I like to bring up because this is sometimes a new frontier for people. So one of the first things I start with is really identify a pain point for the customer, like something specific that you can address in a unique way and solve their problems. And then you work backwards from that. You find that pain point, and you make a clear line about how you as a brand are specifically targeted to solve that problem. The next is sharing insights. Now, a lot of companies like the customer information, the data, the insights, are actually housed in multiple parts of the org. The challenge is when information gets hoarded, like most people don't talk, it kind of doesn't help anyone. So you got to do your best to like centralize the information and make it accessible to all. The next part is empathy for the customers. Now, This is not just for people creating experiences, not just for people like, writing the code or doing the work. Even on the senior leadership level, you need to have empathy for them. Like, I know a lot of incredibly successful leaders, like mostly VP and C-suite, who actually carve out time weekly to listen to help desk calls so they really understand what their customers are going through. Like, those leaders who kind of figure that out, they have a real keen insight for how to solve customer problems in a very unique way. The next part is relationships. They shouldn't be transactional. In financial services, you're dealing with the end-to-end journey over a lifetime. And in some cases, it's generational. It's not just your client, it's like their kids. So when you reframe your thinking about the customer journey over a long enough period of time, like a lifetime, you actually create better experiences. And the last part about if you really want to be customer centric, make it truly part of the organization, you got to tie these outcomes to employee rewards. It's a really simple way to operationalize customer obsession within the business unit. Now, I want to talk about some common traps. Now, there's about 5 things that people fall into in leadership. Now, as a cautionary tale, 60% of new leaders fall into at least one of these. So you may see something familiar either in yourself or in others. It's just really good to be aware of. So the big one is focusing too heavily on the details. This is a trait that's most common. Leaders who embrace the minutia, it ends up being kind of a train wreck for them. Okay. Another one is reacting negatively to criticism. This happens a lot with like low performing executives or people who don't know how to process feedback. Sometimes with design and product orgs, because the nature of the work is so inherently personal, this one actually comes up a little bit. So it's good to kind of handle this one with care. Intimidation is a third trap. Typically people who are insecure, or sometimes there are leaders who are convinced of their rock star status, this is how they respond to things, and it's not healthy. Another one is jumping to conclusions. This happens with a lot of executives who may not have strategic capabilities. They kind of do this, which ends up hurting them. And the last one is micromanaging. Like when a leader gets too hands-on with their direct reports, this is usually triggered by a lack of trust, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But if you want to dig deeper into this, there's some really interesting work by research by a guy named Mark Van Buren, which really goes into a lot of these things in detail. Now, those are the most common traps to avoid. Now, those traps happen because there's derailing behavior. Emotionally unintelligent, lack of critical thinking, or lack of accountability. Now, emotionally unintelligent, that's your micromanaging, you're reacting negatively to criticism and intimidation. This is also people who are manipulative. They're quick to dismiss, they seek to gain at others' expense, or there's a failure to recognize the contributions of others. Now, lack of critical thinking, that's you're focusing too heavily on the details or jumping to conclusion, but as well, it's being easily influenced by others or not sharing relevant information. Like that point about making information accessible, it's a huge winner for you. The last one, lack of accountability. That's not taking responsibility, or it's an abdication of ownership, or it's not being aligned to the values of the organization. The one to really be aware of, the most egregious one where your success as a leader drops 32%, that's failure to recognize the contributions of others. So if there's any note that you take of this one, just make sure that you acknowledge the people that you're working with. You'll just be more successful as a leader. Okay. So the next part, I want to talk about design principles. Now, this is the only definition I'm going to drop at you during this talk. It's design principles. They're fundamental truths that guide how you make things. Now, the good thing is that they kind of unify all the disparate experiences, and it brings a shared feeling to them, to your customers. Now, I'm not going to talk about ones I've did because they're highly strategic and they allow for competitive differentiation, but I'm going to use a public-facing example. Now, the examples that are used, they're great because they connect directly to the company values, the business objectives, and the unique differentiation points of the brand. So we'll talk about Apple's for a second. Their 5th principle is use metaphors. What that means is, like the metaphors is like, so when you're swiping through your phone, like you're looking at your photos and stuff like that, it should feel like, you're flipping through pages of like a book or magazine. Okay. Now, the interesting about that is like how they use this principle across all platforms is that you go to the phone, the tablet, the operating system, the watch, whatever, they all work the same way. And the value that this adds for the customers is that they feel like this experience is familiar. It's easy, it's pleasurable, it reminds them of something that they know. The bonus is it drives more use. So as you look through these things and you put these principles together, you really want to think about what is the thing that you can offer? What is something that's familiar and accessible to your user? And how can you do it in a way that adds value? The great thing about experience design principles and in use, it gives you a ton of value. So it's a guide for decisions. So when they're used throughout the product, they steer you in the right direction. It creates clear and focused designs. It adds value to the customers, and it builds a consistent, enjoyable experience. Also allows for more better direct feedback, because experience principles are rooted in our values, competitive advantages, and the outcomes that we're trying to seek as an organization. Feedback's less subjective. It's more strategic, it's more directed. It's also a really great way to just focus on level of conversations. So instead of competing on viewpoints or managing the loudest voice in the project, you're having fact-based objective conversations. It's not like, arguing over a shade of blue. It's like, okay, what principle are you at odds with? Let's talk about that. The good thing is that it makes it more outcome focused. So the principles, they align you around what's important to the business, and it gives everybody a shared sense of what's true to the company, and it gives purposeful outcomes in the experiences that you're creating. So this last chapter is about trust. Trust is key to healthy working relationships, strong cultures, and high-performing teams. Where your Apples, your Amazons, and your Googles, they actually invest a ton in this, both time and money. If you want some light reading, I highly recommend Googling something called Project Aristotle. It's fascinating. So when we talk about leadership, there's a reason why in decades of management literature, research, and studies, trust is one of the 7 core capabilities. Companies that solve the trust equation, it's just a huge unlock for their business. Teams perform better, processes are more efficient, there's more alignment with the BUs, there's less mental health problems, there's less drama, everything is just better. So one of the things that we talk about in executive coaching levels, it's this thing of the trust triad. It's 3 parts to it. One is that shared vision and purpose. So when everyone's aligned, this is the team charters, it's the vision, the product roadmaps, the principles, the brand values, the OKRs that are transparent. You have this shared vision and reason for being that people are all aligned with. Okay. The second part is about competency and consistency. As a leader, it needs to be understood that you're technically capable of doing the work that's expected. And the consistency is consistent behavior over time. Do you regularly deliver? Do you regularly do what you're going to say you're going to do? That competency and consistency, it's a huge value add and one of those skills that executive leaders just need in order to exist at that level. And the last part is intentions. It needs to be known that you have the best of interest for the people that you're leading. The thing I see a lot is that executives have good intentions, but they're oblivious of the optics of how they show up. This is where things like 360 reviews or regular feedback come into play. And being aware of how you're showing up and being able to adapt accordingly, that's a huge thing in building trust with large groups of people. Now, this takes time. It's not something that you can add to cart. You got to work at this. But when you focus on these 3 things, your trust index will improve in metric time. Now, there are some times where you have to actually make the business case of trust. You need to agree why it's important. I've actually had to do this at 3 previous organizations. So here's my cheat sheet for the things that I've used for the business case of trust. One, it's a critical competitive advantage. So users and customers, so 2 different groups, they're more likely to do business with companies that they trust. You're going to get a better culture. I'll drop some numbers on you real quick. There's a great study in 2017, 50% higher productivity, 74% less stress, 106% more energy at work, 13% fewer sick days, 76% more engagement, 29% more satisfaction with their lives, 40% less burnout. Like, those are huge results that come from trusting cultures. Another great thing is like teams outperform. Managers have a trusting relationship with their direct reports. Like, even that's just as simple as expressing interest in well-being and career success. Direct reports outperform in quality and quantity of their work. And it's a great thing about increased retention. When leaders trust their teams, they just stay longer. And as a surprisingly interesting piece of data that I found is that high trust companies pay 17% more. So if you are not at a company where trust is prioritized and values, maybe consider moving to one that does. So thank you very much for your time. I will gladly stay here and answer any questions until they kick me out of the Zoom. I really look forward to talking with you more.
Thank you, Andrew. And we are not going to kick you off just yet.
Awesome. No, thank you for having me. This is great. I'll also say too, I'm a little jealous of the audience because like they got a ton of really great content today. I was in the green room like listening, and this is just jam packed with good insights. So thanks for putting this together, man.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you're adding to that list right now of really good content. I like how you brought a lot of good things together. Trust, leadership, design principles. I think all of that is just so relevant for this audience. So do you want to jump into some Q&A if that works for you?
Yeah, sure. Dealer's choice.
So one of the first things that came to mind for me when I heard you speak and heard about this topic is this different now in a remote environment? Fostering trust, that type of thing when we maybe work. I know for me at MadPow, believe it or not, I've met my boss once in person. So how does that work?
Okay, that's interesting. I'm gonna give you a coaching question first. What's hard about it?
I think it's
what's the challenge for you?
Yeah. There's something about constant flows of information, and I think in office setting that are really helpful for getting to know someone on a personal level that you don't always get in really structured time. So it's kind of synchronous versus asynchronous communication.
Interesting. Okay, so for you, it's that one-on-one direct in-person relationship that helps you build trust. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Well, all right. So I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff out there that you can do to build trust without actually being in the room. So like on a demonstrating trust level, relationship building, listening and getting to know your colleague, asking for help from your team, admitting mistakes when you don't know things. Oddly, like when I work with executive levels, asking for help and admitting mistake is like a hard thing. So something to keep in mind. Freely sharing your knowledge in your network. Things like this, like what we're all doing here too. Everybody's going to be connecting with each other to share your network, share your knowledge. All that stuff is really good. And like super easy things to build trust is like, just like follow up on things, address issues quickly, be approachable, and be empathetic to your team's emotional state. Like these are all things that really don't require you to be in the room. It's an interesting situation though. So like when I was at GE, it was a global company. Like I'm regularly working on teams where I was like, I had one team member in Moscow, one team member in Asia, another team member in Minot. Minot is Middle East, North Africa, and Turkey. So it was like, everybody was like all over the place. So one of the things that I did, if you want to get super tactical, was I had more conversations, but they were shorter. So I put on my docket, I had like a 5-minute call with them in their time zone in the morning. So whenever their morning was, I would just jump on and be like, hey, how you doing? The more of those instances that you have, you can hear and feel and have a more empathetic connection with them that goes to building trust. I mean, there's a bunch of markers you can look for, like pitch. Like, does their pitch go up at the end of a statement? Like if their pitch goes up, that means they're kind of not sure what they're saying. Pauses. Like when people pause in conversations, it usually means like they're looking to you to fill the gap on that one. Language qualifiers. They're also called splitters. Like if someone uses words like almost, just, sometimes, maybe, Those are words that like people avoid commitment with. So that's something you might want to dig into as a leader, to be like, hey, like, what's going on? I'm hearing this language. Is there something I can help with? Active voice, passive voice, structure. Like, is their conversation linear, tangential? Packet size or chunk. Actually, packet size and chunking is more like Jedi Master techniques, but it's listening to their cadence of speech, because people speak in a regular cadence. If you notice there's a dissonance, or they're speaking in a way that they normally don't, that means there might be something going on there. Chunking is really interesting. Chunking is how people describe what's going on. Like if you're talking to a direct report and they say something like, oh, I have this monster of a challenge, and it's this, that'll signal to you that there might be an adversarial thing going on. But just by using the language that they use and how they chunk the problem. What else? Like where their energy is. I know a lot of speakers previously mentioned energy. Like what are they excited about? Body language, things like that. You could see it on the Zoom. You could also hear it when people are talking. And something really good. This is something that psychiatrists, therapists, and coaches use. It's whatever the last question is in a meeting or in a call. That's called the doorknob question. That's usually the most important thing that they want to talk to you about. So I just gave you like 10 things, and any of those things right there, you don't need to be in a room for. Is that helpful?
I love that. That's great. Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's a laundry list, and I'll have to go back and watch the recording to catch all of that. So more my listening maybe. So we do have a question here from the audience, and again, enter your questions in the Q&A. What are some specific ways? You'd mentioned you kind of customer obsession. One of the keys there being tying that to employee rewards. And the question here is, what are some specific ways you can do that to tie customer obsession to employee rewards, especially when experience metrics I think can inherently be hard to pin down?
Okay. The first thing and the most important thing, so y'all taking notes at home, you actually have to agree as a company that it's important. I'm not kidding. Like you actually have to get that alignment, and you have to agree that as an organization, as a team, as a business unit, whatever your structure is, you need to agree that it's important. There's some really simple ways you could do it. I mentioned earlier, like that, require everyone to make 20-minute listening calls to help desks. Like that's an easy thing. Like when they check that off, that ties to their employee rewards. You could manage, what are some good metrics? Like high CSAT scores, experience satisfaction, customer acquisition rate, churn, retention, sustainability, like referrals, like any of those things, you could actually put a metric behind it, and you can make something that is rewardable and something that's required as an organization. Probably the biggest one, though, something that I hope all executives in this room do, a really easy metric, is just to have diversity in the room. Diversity on the Zoom call, diversity on the team, you need it. There is clear, plausible, and like empirical data that companies with greater diversity perform better. Specifically if you have like 3 or more women in top leadership positions, ROI, earnings, and stock growth all improve. Talking about customer obsession, like those 3 things usually signal that customers like your product.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great point. Something I think we can all work to remember and work towards, certainly if we're not already there. So, Andrew, thanks so much for being here. We are going to kick you off now, but really appreciate it.
Thank you all very much. Take care. And also, if you have questions afterwards, I'm super accessible. Like, just ping me on social media. All right, thanks everybody. Have a good one.